All right. Welcome to this week's episode of the Consistency Corner podcast. I'm excited to have Carla Moats on today, and we are going to talk about profit mindset, which you guys know I talk a lot about mindset being a big foundational piece of your overall marketing strategy. And I think a mindset centered around profit is incredibly important to the success and health of your business. And Carla is a fractional CFO and finance strategy and coach for female business owners ready to show their finances some love and build wildly profitable businesses. And she spent over 30 years helping grow businesses up to 9 figures, and how she works with small business owners who are ready to make more profit so that they can live their dream life, which I know we've talked a lot here on the podcast about, the 6-figure launch and 7-figure launch and all the things that we see online. But if there's no profit behind that, those numbers don't really matter. So I'm excited to get into this a little bit more with Carla and talk about that. Carla, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about your journey and how you landed in being a profit coach and what that looks like in your day-to-day today?
Yeah, I've worked in accounting and finance for over 30 years, and I've done a little bit of everything. I have worked in public accounting, which is where CPAs cut their teeth. I won't even say when I passed the CPA exam. I'll just age myself. And so, a lot of CPAs cut their teeth in public accounting. I've worked in public accounting. I spent more than half my career in corporate. I've also done some consulting. That's what I've done for about the last 6 years, and worked in a variety of different roles, from managing areas like processing areas like invoicing and accounts receivable, to being a controller, to doing what we call financial planning and analysis, which is budgeting and forecasting and really analysis to help the CEOs or the top level executives make decisions. And like I said, I've done some consulting, and now I work with small business owners, which, business owners generally from about 250,000 in revenue up to about 10 million. Because I just really like working with the smaller businesses, and I like the relationship I get to have with my clients at that level. So that's what I do.
Yeah, I'm curious, you're focused on helping female business owners. How is it that you landed on that niche, or when did you maybe pivot into looking to support females who own businesses?
I think women, we get mansplained to a lot. You'll hear that on my podcast. On my podcast, I was like, "This is a mansplaining free zone," and I think when I started working with small business owners, and originally I was just working with them kind of for free. They would ask me questions, and one of the things I really saw is they were afraid to ask questions. Maybe they've been talked over before. They get I had a client who was mansplained horribly to by her accountant. He told her you're not allowed to touch your own books. So I was like, what's that all about? These are your books and not theirs. So I just think they're underserved. And I think, also with how we're raised as women, and we can sit here, and talk about the patriarchy, and everything. I want to give them a level playing field. I want to be able to simplify things. I want them to be able to come in, and almost all my clients will come in initially and tell me, I know this is a dumb question, or I feel really embarrassed to ask this question. I don't want I want it to be a totally safe space. And then I just I like working with badass women. That's really what it comes down to. So
yeah. And I think it's true. Like, you don't know what you don't know. And so there are no dumb questions, but there are people that can make you feel dumb for asking the question. So I love that it's a safe space.
Yeah, there definitely are. And I think if you didn't come, a lot of the business owners, particularly with females, not all of them came out of corporate. If you came out of corporate where you had responsibility for a profit and loss statement, like if you're already a general manager or already a head of marketing where you had some type of P&L responsibilities, you're a little familiar with the wording and some of the language. But one of the biggest things I hear from women is, I just don't understand. I don't understand it. And it makes them feel, they feel like they're stupid, or they feel like they're inferior. And they just never got trained. They never had a mentor. And, one of the things that, they don't tell you about corporate is that big time CEO who's, whether it's a man or a woman, who's standing in front of the mic talking about, some new product they're rolling out. They have a CFO, a controller, a whole finance team behind them that makes them look good, frankly. And small business owners have never really had that. And that's what I want to bring to the table for them.
Yeah. And I can even tell you, as somebody who came from a corporate background, When I became a marketing director, I had no experience in running a budget for a department. I didn't know. And the first year that I was a marketing director, I was in charge of a budget, but like I didn't get any say in what we spent it on. So like I was in charge, but I wasn't. I had to ask for
That's
everything.
the way corporate is.
Right, right. And then when the next year I was like, hey, I should have a little bit more say in this. And also, I would like to go to bat for how much I think my budget should be. And like, let's have a conversation about it. But those are all things that like I had to teach myself. I had to go to the controller and say, can you please explain to me what this means? Because I don't know. And so even when you are coming up in the corporate ranks, you don't know what you don't know because they don't teach you all that stuff in school.
Well, and the other thing is, and I really noticed this in the small business space, and you've warmed my heart in the beginning of the intro when you talked about, profit. It's not talked about in the small business in the small business coaching space, particularly whether it's marketing coaches, sales coaches, business development coaches. Everybody talks about grow that revenue, chase you talked about earlier, chase the 6-figure, chase the 7-figure, chase the 8-figure. And I tell people all the time, next time somebody tells you they're making $1 million, ask them how much they're paying themselves, and ask them how much profit they're bringing, they're setting aside, because that's the real answer. You can have $1 million business and and be making $50,000, or you can have $1 million business and be making $300,000. Which one do you want? I know which one
Right.
I want.
Right.
So
Yeah, 100%. So talk to me a little bit more about, for someone who's not familiar, the profit first approach. What does that even mean?
profit first is a cash flow management system, and it basically the traditional accounting equation, which people may be familiar with, is I have my revenue, which is my sales, and then I have all my expenses, and if I take the difference between those two numbers, I have profit. Well, that what that does is it makes, particularly in this, I think in the small business space, it makes profit like what happens to you. It makes it very reactive. And a lot of business owners, when I first start working with them, they have no idea. They can tell me what their revenue number is, but they really can't tell me what their profit number is, because it's just something that happens to them, or even worse, whether they say, I'm waiting on my tax guy, call me in April, tell me how I did for the year. Okay. So it becomes very reactive. And basically profit first flips that equation, and it says, okay, yeah, you have to have revenue. You always have to start with revenue, right? But I'm going to subtract out the profit. I'm going to figure out upfront what my profit's going to be. And then what I have left is my expense pool. And that's what I'm going to pay my expenses out of. And it ensures you're paying yourself. It ensures you're setting aside money for taxes, because let's not even get started, especially if you have a really good year I had a really, if you have a really good year, and your tax, the story I always tell is that you have a really good year and your tax guy calls you and says, congratulations, you had an awesome year. Congratulations on record earnings. And he's like, can you write me a check for $50,000 for your taxes? And the owner's like, what?
You don't have
I
$50,000.
already spent that $50,000. He's like, well, you better figure something out, because the IRS waits on no one. And so you basically, you're setting aside your profit, you're setting aside owner's pay, you're setting aside money for taxes, and what you're left with is your your OPEX pool. And what it does is, what I really love about it, because my theme, for anyone who follows me, is I'm all about make profit intentional. I said earlier, the normal accounting equation is profits reactive. We want to be proactive. We want to decide up front what our profit's going to be, plan for it intentionally, and that's really, to me, the draw of profit first. And then it takes away a lot of the lingo. Doesn't mean you don't still go look at your financial statements, but it takes away a lot of the fancy accounting lingo that frankly the accounting industry likes to throw around to justify huge billing rates. So that's what it is.
Yeah. And I know I read the book Profit First probably before I was ready to read it. I was not making any revenue and started reading it and was like, this is, never mind. I don't even make any money. Why am I reading this? But as you start to see those dollars come into your bank account, it was helpful to have that background and that understanding to know, put some money aside for taxes, put money aside to pay yourself, and then this is what we can invest, or this is what we
And
can
you, and you can start small. The one thing I will tell people if they read the book is to to take some of the data that's in the book with a grain of salt, because I think it's more oriented towards manufacturing consumer products companies. It's not oriented as much towards service businesses that don't have a lot of overhead, because frankly, some of the profit margins he said he shoot for is good. I tell my clients, if that's all your profit margin is, then we definitely need to talk. I work mostly with service-based business owners. And the other thing is you can start small, because in the beginning, I tell clients the most important thing about paying yourself is actually doing it. It's not even the amount. It's if it's 1%, if you sell $100 product, even if it's only $1 that you're setting aside, and people say, well, yeah, but that's nothing. It's just like anything else, like it's like going out and starting an exercise program. It's not necessarily in the beginning how much you're exercising. It's the fact that you got on the treadmill to start with. It's the same thing with owner's pay. It's not so much what you're paying yourself. It's that you're getting in that habit, and you're building that habit early on, because what will happen is if you don't build that habit and you start to get up to 200, 300,000, you've already built the predisposition to just spend the money. And and those are the clients that come to me, making six figures, and they've still never paid themselves any money. So
Yeah. So in terms of spending the money, you hear people all the time say like, well, you have to spend money to make money. So when it comes to spending, particularly on marketing, how is that something that you guide your clients to do so that they are still being profitable, but allocating money towards marketing so that they can continue to grow?
well, a lot of it depends on what type of industry are you in, how mature is your business. Obviously somebody who is, you know, hitting the first 100,000 is going to be different maybe than you just hit their first 100,000 is going to be different than the person who's maybe been making 100,000 for a few years. So a lot of it depends on what's your industry, what's the maturity, and what are your needs. But generally, you have that bucket of OpEx, and then basically you go through and you have to look at, okay, so out of this bucket of OpEx, how do I want to allocate the money? And think of it as similar to a lot of people will do budgets for their home, but they don't do them for their business. So you can start with a budget, which is, okay, here's my allocation of operating expenses. Now, how am I going to split that up between technology and marketing costs, and client acquisition costs, whatever they are. But yeah, you sit down, and you can even have I know someone who she's quite large, but she uses a version of Profit First. She's kind of modified it for her own purposes, and she actually has a marketing fund. So in addition to allocating owner's pay, profit, and taxes, she has a fund because she does a lot of Facebook ads. So she has a different fund, and it's basically a percentage of all their revenue that comes in every month. So every month she has a certain percentage, I think it's 5% of her revenue, and it goes into a marketing fund. And it's actually a separate bank account. She says all of their marketing costs get paid out of that. So
Yeah.
again, a lot of it depends on what you're doing. I think the biggest thing is making sure that when you're spending money on marketing costs, just like I tell people when they're spending money on finance costs, make sure you know what is it you really need, and just being intentional is a total game changer, with from a mindset perspective.
Yeah. I'm curious because a lot of my listeners are solopreneurs or have a very small team, maybe a contractor or two. And as service providers, your time becomes such a resource in your business. And a lot of times, if we can't spend money, we're spending time. So I'm curious how kind of you track or your clients track or you recommend people track their time when it comes to that being a limited resource in your business.
Yeah, I think what you have to be really diligent about, and I'm even doing this myself at my own business, is I'm starting to add some team members. Is what am I going to do with the time I gain?
That's a great
I
question.
think that's the real thing. Is when I save those 10 hours, what am I going to do with that time? Am I going to actually, what's the return? Because even when they hire for somebody for marketing, whether it's for marketing or finance or any type of business service, you still want a result for it. It should not be just a total expense line item.
Hmm.
And from the perspective of like outsourcing marketing or outsourcing finance, it's, if I'm going to save those 10 hours, what am I going to do with them? If I'm going to surf Facebook, I'm not going to get a return. But am I using that to get in my zone of genius? I talk a lot about your zone of genius, and your zone of genius is marketing. My zone of genius is finance. Most business owners that are hiring us, that is not their zone of genius. But I want to make sure that when they hire me to do my zone of genius, what are you doing to stay in your zone of genius? Because your zone of genius is where you make your money.
Hmm.
That's where you drive your revenue up. And so again, how are you using that? What I think people have to be careful of is, and I know I can speak for this because marketing, I have to admit, is one of my least favorite functions in my business. And make sure I'm hiring something, not just because I don't like to do it. It's one thing to outsource because I don't like to do it, but again, how am I going to use that money? Because that's really where you're going to see the return on it. And I think outsourcing your marketing, your financing, your finance. There's a lot of other services. It's great. You just got to be again intentional about okay when I'm going to take those hours and I'm basically going to invest those hours now back into my business and what's the return I'm going to get in those hours. That's
Yeah.
my long-winded answer.
Yeah, and I think to that point, if it's something that you really don't enjoy and really drains you, and you're putting those hours back into something that lights you up and gives you energy, and that's going to help you
Right.
produce more revenue
Right.
because then you're able to show up that's as the best version of yourself. And you're funny that you're like, marketing is not mine, finance is not mine, a bookkeeper is the first person that I outsource
Yeah,
to in my business.
bookkeeper or tax advisor is usually the first person that a business will hire. But I know in the bookkeeping space, though, I spend a lot of my time right now cleaning up bad bookkeeping. So again, it's when you're hiring, finance or marketing, make sure you know, make sure you know what you need. And I think the other thing, especially newer entrepreneurs have to be cautious of is not just doing something because everybody else is doing it. I see a lot of that in I have a lot of my friends are coaches. I see a lot of that in the coaching space. I have to go hire this high ticket business coach, or I have to go enroll in this sales program because all my friends are doing it. And you really need to understand, what is it that you really, what is it that you really need? Because even within marketing, there's different types of marketing. There's different, ways you generate clients, and what is it, what is it that you really need? So
Yeah, I tell my clients all the time, marketers are really good at marketing. So every single type of marketer is going to convince you that you need them. But we need to go back to your overall strategy, your business goals, your profit goals. And does this make sense right now? Because you're right. There might be something that works, but it doesn't work for your business or it doesn't work right now. And so those are great questions to ask yourself when it comes to outsourcing. What are some other maybe common mistakes that you see business owners make when it comes to investing in marketing without maybe considering profit goals?
I think that, and I don't think this is just specific to marketing, but the number one thing I see from clients is they're just overspending. They've taken that, and I think this is especially prevalent in the small business space, especially in the digital space, where there's this philosophy of, well, you gotta invest. You should invest 100% of all your profits for the first X number of years. I was like, I'll bet you the person telling you that is making their money off of you investing your money. So I think overspending is the number one thing, and that's one of the advantages of profit first because it allows you again to be more intentional. Is if you can't pay your bills and you're not able to pay yourself money, and again it could be a small amount, but for every dollar you get, you should be allocating between taxes, owner's pay, profit, and OpEx. And if your expenses are beyond that, then you have what I call an outsized business. You have a business that just can't support the level of expense you have. And again, everybody goes through a growth period. I mean, but I think the other thing is you need to decide up front if you are going to invest, or even if you're willing to take a loss. I know people that are, especially if they have a side hustle, where they have a day job that's paying their salary. They're like, I'm going to put everything in my business for the first 2 years. Again, if you're doing it intentionally, as a part of an overall strategy to say, okay, for the first 2 years, I'm essentially going to fund my business. That's great. I think the problem becomes when the people get their tax return or they get their bank account. They're like, where did all my money go?
Hmm.
I signed this big client and now I don't have any money left. Or now my tax guy wants a tax payment and I just don't have the cash. That's where you really have to be, careful of. And again, like I said earlier, they're spending money because they don't, without really understanding it. I see a lot of people, spending money when they don't have a strategy. Your
Hmm.
strategy is your overarching thing that should guide, call it your GPS. Your strategy is your GPS for your system or for your business that tells you how you should be spending your money.
Yeah, I love that you call it a GPS. I always talk about that your marketing strategy is a roadmap between your brand and your business goals. And so that strategy, whether it's an investment strategy or an outsourcing strategy or whatever, is guiding you towards, is this going to help me reach those business goals. And those business goals should not just be top line revenue. They should
Yeah, they
be.
definitely, that's one of the first things I tell people. If you take nothing else away from today, if you don't do profit first or anything, set a profit goal. Most
Mhm.
business owners will set a revenue goal, even if they don't write it down, they have an idea in their head. Um, and again, working with women, I see more with women, I think, than with men. Um, and again, chalk this up to the patriarchy, is that a lot of women will, they get uncomfortable talking about money, or they feel it's greedy or whatever. Setting a profit goal, no matter what it is, maybe it's 5%, whatever it is, I don't really care about the number. I tell people don't care what your profit goal number is. But set an intentional profit goal up front is a total mindset changer in your business, because it just makes you it's like having a food plan. Again, if you're planning your if you're planning your food, you're planning your profit, you're just automatically going to be more intentional. So that's the one thing people can take away is,
Yeah.
plan for your profit, because it's not just hitting a revenue number doesn't by itself make you more profitable.
So I'm curious, you said something earlier about the different buckets and you said owner's pay and profit. Now, I think a lot of solopreneurs think those are the same thing. Why is it that you look at them differently?
Well, it can be a little, without going into a lot of detail, it could be a little bit different if you are an LLC or a sole proprietor versus someone who's filing as an S corp. Because if you're filing as an S corp, your owners, you have to take a salary, and that becomes an expense of the business. But most of the clients I'm working with, they're big enough, they're an S corp, and so your owner's pay is basically what you're paying yourself for your work in your business. Okay, it is. If you're a sole proprietor or sole proprietor, not an S corp, you're taking it as a draw. If you have an S corp, you're taking it as an actual salary. Your profit is your dividend. It's your distribution. And what if for clients that have profit first, what I tell them is you're going to pay your owner's pay. That's going to be your reasonable salary if you're an S corp, and then you're going to have this profit bucket. And what you're going to do then is you're going to take a portion of that profit bucket, and you're going to probably either reinvest it back in the company, or you're going to use it to build your cash reserves. And then you're going to take a percentage of that profit out, and you just paid yourself a bonus.
Mm-hmm.
When I was in corporate, that was one of the advantages of corporate compensation systems. You were director of marketing. I'm going to, if it was for a larger company, I'm going to bet you probably had some type of incentive-based compensation system. That's what your profit distribution is. So if I'm I'm going to try and keep the math even. If I'm $100,000 business and my profit's 50%, that's $50,000. And I'm going to take, let's just say we decide 25,000 is going to go back into the business, and I'm going to take 25,000 out, and then ask yourself what could change in my life or my community or my family with an extra $25,000. And that's really what it does, is it becomes a dividend. If you own stock, in a mature business today, you get periodic dividends from them. And that's basically what your profit is.
Yeah. And I think you're right. Those are all things that in the small business space, in the online space, we're just not talking about enough. And so I appreciate you shedding light and making that a conversation that we should be having. Any specific advice or steps for business owners who realize, like, I have not been doing this and maybe I should start, of what to do when they maybe feel like overwhelmed or feel like it's too late?
It's never too late. I work with, I've been working with clients that are relatively new, and I've also working with clients. I've got a client right now who's been around for 30 years and still doesn't have a solid bookkeeping system. And so, it's never too late. I think the first thing to do is to take small action. And I think your small action is know your numbers. I think that's what it starts with. Even when I tell people set a profit goal, a lot of times that's intimidating to them because they just don't know their numbers. So know what your numbers are. Make some time each month to focus on your finances. Know your numbers. Ask your questions of your bookkeeper. If you ask questions of your bookkeeper and they can't answer them, you have one or two options. Either they're not a good bookkeeper and you need to go find a new one, or you've outgrown your bookkeeper. Especially if you've gotten up to the $250,000 range. At some point, you're going to probably outgrow. If you're inquisitive and a curious person, and you're driven to accomplish bigger goals in your business, you're probably going to start asking questions that your bookkeeper simply doesn't have the experience to answer. And so, but ask those questions, because no question is a dumb question. And that's what your bookkeeper's there for. That's the other thing. Your bookkeeper is there. A good bookkeeper, a good accountant, a good tax advisor, they're going to empower you. So anytime you feel like you're being, mansplained to or not being heard, that's a red flag.
Yeah, for sure. Well, these were very thought-provoking things for us to consider for our business, and I appreciate you sharing your wisdom. And before we wrap up, I always have a couple questions that I ask our guests just to get to know you a little bit better. And one of the things that we talk a lot about on the Consistency Corner is brand values or business values, which I believe are really important in guiding your business goals and those business strategies and that GPS, that your values help shape that. So I'd love to know, what's one of your business values and how did you land on that?
I think transparency is one of my biggest values. I spent some time before I really focused on this niche. I spent some time as a coach, and I think coming out of the coaching, there's a lot of what they call bro marketing or whatever, high pressure. I'm really into transparency. I've had people meet with me, and I know that I'm not the person for them. Either they're not ready for me. I'm just not a good use of their money, or they need something else. I have no problem telling somebody you're not the right fit for me. So I think when you're really transparent, that's what I value.
Yeah.
And I value it in others as well. So
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think you're right. There's a lot of bro marketing out there that has been taught. And so then people are even doing it, not realizing that they're doing it. But when we take the time to reflect on our values, then we're able to step into alignment and do the things that feel good and feel, meant for us in our business.
yeah.
So I love that. One of my brand values is personal development. And so I always love to ask your favorite personal development book or podcast, or if you're like many guests and you can't pick a favorite, something recently that you've read or listened to that resonated with you.
All right. Well, can I give you two?
Yeah.
So a book is The Big Leap. I've mentioned The Zone of Genius, and I read that book a few months ago. It actually had a lot to do with how I do my marketing now, because it's very much about empowering business. I want to empower my clients to spend more time in their zone of genius, and knowing your zone of genius. So that's one. And then I'll give my podcast a little plug. I launched a podcast about 6 weeks ago, so you can find me. It's called the Purposeful Profit Podcast, and we talk a lot about being intentional with profit, and so that you can build a profitable business.
I love it. Well, congratulations on your podcast. That is
Yeah, thanks. It's my little baby. It's my little baby.
An exciting launch. Yes. And then my last question, because we do talk so much about consistency here, is something that you are really consistent with, either in your business or your personal life, that you're really proud of.
I would say right now, I'm going to stick with the theme. I've actually I haven't skipped any episodes of my podcast. I've been getting everything done. I have a real track record of inconsistency when it comes to my marketing, my social media. And I knew when I did this, the podcast really had to be consistent. So I have my own little Asana board and everything. And I'm finally about 5 weeks into this now, and I feel like I've got a system. I know exactly what I need to do each week, and so I haven't missed an episode, and so that's what I'm pretty proud of that right now, because like I said, consistency in my marketing. And I'm not sure if I should admit that or not. Is that like heresy or?
That's okay. And you know what? I love that you have been consistent in your podcast, and then you can celebrate that. And I encourage my clients to have a long form content container, such as a blog or a podcast that you can be consistent with.
That's the actual reason I created it, because I was really struggling with content creation, and I needed to have like a cornerstone foundational piece that I could just. My ultimate goal is for this to be like my content machine, and have blog posts and audiograms and this to generate 90% of my content. And it's fun. I mean, it is a lot more work, for anybody who's listening. It's not as easy as it sounds to put on a podcast. It takes a little bit of work, but yeah, it's definitely worth it. I enjoy it. It's been fun.
And people not in the podcasting space, I remember when I was probably right around where you are, I'd published a few episodes a month or so in, and a friend of mine said, "How's your podcast going? Is it really taking off? You're like making money from that?" And I'm like, that's not why I'm doing this.
Yeah.
not going to
Yeah,
become a millionaire
it's
with my
definitely
podcast.
it's definitely a long game. And yeah,
Yes.
actually, I mean, and even when I invested in it, because I made some investments, I hired somebody to help me launch. And those were investments that I didn't plan at the beginning of the year. They weren't originally part of my profit target. So that's the other thing I'll say here too is as you set up profit goal, it doesn't mean you don't reserve the right as the business owner to make decisions and invest in things that you didn't previously plan to. It's just that I know because I had that profit goal this year, I was much more intentional about spending the money and really thinking it through than before when I didn't have a profit goal and it was like, oh yeah, you want 3,000 or you want 1,500 for that? Yeah, I got it. Just yeah, here's the money. So
Yeah.
and I am making, and I'm making, making a profit this year. So even after this investment. So
Yeah, that's great. Well, Carla, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with our listeners today. If people would like to learn more outside of your podcast, where else could they connect with you? Where are you hanging out online?
I hang out mostly on Facebook and LinkedIn. They can find me on LinkedIn, just Carla Moats, Facebook, Carla Moats Coaching. And then they can find me over on my website, www.carlamoats.com.
And
And then they can find the podcast there as well. So,
yeah, and we'll put all that in the show notes. Thanks again so much for
all right.
being
Thanks
here.
again for having me. I really appreciate it.